Cleaner receives a letter in Russian for the millionaire. The next day, her life changes forever. The grandfather clock in the Sterling Mansion's marble foyer chimed 5:30 as Maria Elena Vasquez turned her key in the service entrance for the 3,653rd time. She knew the exact count because each morning brought the same ritual, the heavy brass key sliding into the lock with a satisfying click, the whisper of expensive hinges as the door opened to reveal a world that existed in stark contrast to her own cramped apartment 15 miles away in East LA. The scent of jasmine from the manicured gardens drifted through the morning air, mingling with the faint aroma of Sterling's imported coffee that would soon brew automatically in the kitchen's state-of-the-art machine. Maria had memorized every smell, every shadow, every creak of this palatial home over 15 years of faithful service. She could navigate its 47 rooms blindfolded, her hands knowing exactly where dust gathered on the crystal chandeliers, where fingerprints smudged the Italian marble surfaces, where secrets hid in the spaces between luxury and loneliness. At 45, Maria's hands bore the permanent scars of hard work, small cuts from broken glass, chemical burns from industrial cleaners, calluses that spoke of countless hours spent making other people's lives pristine. Her dark hair, streaked with premature silver, was pulled back in the same practical bun she'd worn since the day she first walked through these doors. Desperate for work after her husband abandoned their family, this morning felt different, though she couldn't pinpoint why. Perhaps it was the way the California sun slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting unfamiliar shadows across the Persian rugs. Or maybe it was the subtle displacement of objects in Robert Sterling's private study, papers that seemed shuffled, a coffee cup left on the mahogany desk when he never left messes behind. Sterling himself had been different lately. The tech mogul who had built a digital empire worth $12 billion had always been distant but polite, acknowledging her presence with a nod and the occasional, "Good morning, Maria." But in recent weeks she'd noticed changes, the way his steel-grey eyes darted toward windows when cars passed outside, how he'd started working from home more often, declining the social invitations that once filled his calendar. The phone calls conducted in hushed tones behind closed doors. As she began her morning routine in the kitchen, Maria's thoughts drifted to Sophia, her 19-year-old daughter, probably still asleep in their small apartment after another late night studying computer science at UCLA. Every dollar Maria earned scrubbing floors and polishing surfaces went towards Sophia's education. The dream that kept her moving through each day, her daughter would never have to clean another person's home, never have to smile gratefully when handed worn clothing as generous gifts, never have to pretend she didn't understand the conversations wealthy people had around her as if she were merely another piece of furniture. The irony wasn't lost on Maria that she knew more about the Sterling family's secrets than most of their actual friends. She'd overheard divorce proceedings, business deals, family feuds, and financial troubles whispered behind closed doors. She'd seen Sterling's ex-wife's pills hidden in designer purses, witnessed his adult children's desperate attempts to secure larger allowances, observed the revolving door of business associates who smiled to his face and cursed his name the moment they left. But lately, something deeper was troubling the man who owned this monument to success. She'd found him staring at old photographs, not the staged family portraits that decorated the public rooms, but candid shots he kept hidden in his desk drawer, pictures of people she didn't recognize taken in what looked like a different country, a different life. The coffee maker gurgled to life, its programmed perfection a stark contrast to the instant coffee Maria could afford at home. She moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, wiping down surfaces that were already spotless, arranging fresh flowers in crystal vases, preparing the house for another day of Sterling's increasingly reclusive existence. The sound of footsteps on the grand staircase announced his arrival. At 52, Robert Sterling still commanded attention when he entered a room. Tall, distinguished, with the kind of confident bearing that came from knowing he could buy and sell most problems. But this morning, Maria noticed the slight tremor in his hands as he reached for his coffee, the way his usually impeccable shirt was wrinkled as if he'd slept in it. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," she said, her accented English carefully neutral. He looked up, and for a moment their eyes met with an intensity that caught her off guard. There was something desperate in his gaze, a vulnerability she'd never seen before. "Maria," he said, his voice rougher than usual. He stopped himself, shaking his head. "Never mind, just be careful today. Lock the doors when you leave." Before she could respond, he retreated to his study with his coffee, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy with unspoken warnings. Maria stood alone in the gleaming kitchen, surrounded by luxury that would never belong to her, feeling the first flutter of something that might have been fear. In 15 years of service, Sterling had never told her to be careful. He'd never looked at her with such haunted eyes. He'd never acted like a man who was afraid. She resumed her work, but every sound seemed amplified now. The tick of the grandfather clock, the whisper of fabric as she dusted upholstery, the distant hum of traffic beyond the estate's iron gates. Somewhere in this house of secrets, something was about to change. She could feel it in the way the morning light seemed different, in the tension that crackled through rooms that had always felt safe. By evening, when she finally left through the same service entrance she'd used for over 5,000 mornings, Maria carried with her a growing certainty that her invisible life was about to become very visible indeed. The key turned in the lock for what she couldn't know would be one of the last times, sealing away another day in a house where secrets gathered like dust in corners no one else thought to clean. The next morning would bring discovery, and with it, the beginning of the end of everything she thought she knew about the man whose life she'd been carefully maintaining, while her own quietly fell apart around the edges. The morning after Sterling's cryptic warning, Maria arrived to find the mansion unusually still. Even the birds seemed to have abandoned their usual symphony in the garden's ancient oak trees. The silence pressed against her eardrums as she made her way through rooms that felt somehow different. As if the house itself was holding its breath, Sterling's study had always been off-limits during his presence, but today the door stood ajar, and she could hear no sounds from within. The morning light streaming through the tall windows revealed a space in disarray. Papers scattered across the normally pristine desk, books pulled from shelves and left open, the leather chair positioned as if someone had been keeping watch through the window all night. Maria hesitated at the threshold. In 15 years, she had respected every boundary, followed every unspoken rule, but the chaos before her spoke of desperation, and Sterling's words from yesterday echoed in her mind. Be careful. Her cleaning supplies felt heavier than usual as she entered the study. The Persian carpet beneath her feet was expensive enough to feed her family for a year, yet she walked across it with the same careful steps she'd perfected over a decade and a half of invisible service. The mahogany desk dominated the room like an altar to power, its surface now a testament to someone's frantic search for something. It was while dusting the bookshelf behind his desk that she saw it, a flash of white tucked between 2 volumes of financial reports. The envelope was thick, expensive paper, the kind that whispered of importance even before you read its contents. What caught her attention wasn't the quality of the stationery, but the strange, angular script across its front, letters that looked nothing like English, forming words she couldn't begin to pronounce. Maria's hand trembled as she reached for it. The envelope bore Sterling's name, but the writing looked Russian. She had seen enough movies, enough news reports to recognize the Cyrillic alphabet, even if she couldn't read it. But why would Robert Sterling, the all-American tech mogul, be receiving letters in Russian? Her mind raced through possibilities, each more troubling than the last. The envelope hadn't been opened. The red wax seal remained intact. Impressed with what looked like a family crest, an eagle with outstretched wings clutching a sword, Maria turned it over in her hands, feeling the weight of secrets it might contain. Sterling's behavior, his paranoia, his warning, suddenly it all felt connected to this single piece of correspondence. She looked toward the study door, listening for any sound of Sterling's approach. The house remained silent, with movements that felt both guilty and necessary. Maria slipped her phone from her pocket and photographed the envelope, front, back, and the mysterious seal. Her hands shook as she returned the letter to its hiding place between the reports, arranging the books exactly as she'd found them. The rest of her morning passed in a haze of nervous energy. Every sound made her jump. The ice maker in the kitchen, the automatic sprinkler system in the garden, the distant hum of traffic beyond the estate gates. She found herself checking the study repeatedly, making sure the envelope remained undisturbed, wondering if Sterling even knew it was there. By noon, when she typically took her lunch break, Maria had made a decision that would change everything. She needed to know what that letter said. The drive to UCLA felt longer than usual, traffic crawling through the city as if the universe itself was testing her resolve. Her old Honda wheezed up the hills, past neighborhoods that marked the gradual transition from her world to her daughter's, from cracked sidewalks and chain-link fences to tree-lined streets and coffee shops where a single drink cost more than Maria made in an hour. She found Sophia in the computer lab, surrounded by code that might as well have been hieroglyphics to Maria's untrained eye. At 19, her daughter possessed a confidence Maria had never known, the assurance that came from being the first in her family to attend university, from speaking perfect English alongside her mother's native Spanish, from understanding that the world could be shaped by intelligence and determination rather than just endured. "Mija," Maria called softly. Not wanting to disturb the other students, Sophia looked up, her dark eyes so much like her father's, though Maria tried not to think about that, immediately registering concern. "Mama, what are you doing here? Is everything okay?" They found a quiet corner in the student union, surrounded by the chatter of young people who had never known what it meant to live paycheck to paycheck. Maria pulled out her phone with hands that wouldn't quite steady. "I need you to look at something," she said, switching to Spanish as she always did when the conversation was important. "And I need you to promise me you won't ask questions until I'm ready to explain." Sophia's eyebrows rose, but she nodded. She had inherited her mother's capacity for quiet strength, for understanding that sometimes knowledge came with a price. The photographs appeared on Sophia's laptop screen with startling clarity. Her daughter's fingers flew over the keyboard, pulling up translation software with the ease of someone who had grown up in the digital age. "It's Russian, definitely," Sophia murmured, her voice dropping instinctively. "The handwriting is formal, old-fashioned almost." She squinted at the screen, typing Cyrillic characters with careful precision. "Mama, where did you get this?" "Not yet, Mija. What does it say?" Sophia's expression grew increasingly troubled as she worked through the translation. Her face, usually animated with the enthusiasm of youth, became grave beyond her years. "The address? It's to Dmitry Volkov, not Robert Sterling," she said slowly. "And the return address is from Tatiana Volkova in somewhere called Novosibirsk." She looked up at her mother with eyes that held new understanding. "Mama, this isn't just a letter, it's a warning." The student union continued its cheerful bustle around them, while Maria felt her world shift beneath her feet. Dmitry Volkov, not Robert Sterling at all, but someone else entirely, someone with a Russian name receiving urgent correspondence from someone who shared that name. "The letter," Maria whispered. "What does it say?" Sophia's voice was barely audible as she read from her translation. "They know where you are. Papa's old friends have found the trail. Take Anya and disappear again. They're coming for what you stole. Your loving sister, Tanya." The cafeteria noise faded to white sound as Maria processed this revelation. Sterling, Dmitry, whoever he was, wasn't just receiving mysterious letters. He was hiding from something, or someone, and from the sound of it they had found him. "Mama," Sophia said, her voice sharp with worry, "who is this man you work for?" That was the question, wasn't it? After 15 years of cleaning his house, serving his coffee, maintaining his perfect life, Maria realized she had no idea who Robert Sterling really was. She only knew that he was in danger, that people were looking for him, and that somehow, by photographing this letter, she had become part of whatever storm was coming. The drive back to Beverly Hills felt like traveling toward a different planet, one where the man she had trusted with her family's financial security might be living under a false identity, where Russian strangers were hunting someone she saw every day, where her simple act of curiosity had opened a door she might never be able to close. As she pulled through the estate gates that evening, Maria carried with her the weight of a secret that could destroy everything she had worked for. But she also carried something else, a growing certainty that the invisible woman who cleaned house for the wealthy was about to become very visible indeed. The letter was still there when she checked, still hidden between the financial reports, still sealed with its mysterious eagle crest. But now it felt different. Now it felt like evidence that evening. Maria's small apartment felt smaller than ever. The cramped living room with its second-hand furniture and carefully mended curtains seemed to close in around her as she sat across from Sophia at their tiny kitchen table. Between them lay her daughter's laptop, its screen glowing with the full translation of the letter that had turned her world upside down. Sophia had worked through the entire message with painstaking care, cross-referencing words, checking grammar, ensuring every nuance was captured. The result was a window into a life that bore no resemblance to the calm, controlled existence of Robert Sterling. "Read it again," Maria said quietly, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Sophia's voice was steady, but Maria could hear the underlying tension as her daughter read the translated letter aloud. "My dearest brother Dmitry, I pray this letter reaches you before they do. Papa's old associates from the Bratva have been asking questions in Novosibirsk. They know about New York, about the technology you took, about the new identity. Mikhail Kozlov was here last week. You remember him, Papa's enforcer. He showed me a photograph of you taken outside some American mansion. You look older, grayer, but he recognized you immediately. They know you're Robert Sterling now. They know about your billions. Kozlov said they want what belongs to them. The algorithms, the encryption keys, everything you stole when you fled. He mentioned a daughter. Dmitri, they know about Anya. Please, whatever money you've made, however safe you feel, it's not enough. Disappear again, burn everything and run. They're coming for you. And this time, they won't just ask for what they want. Your sister who loves you always, Tatiana. The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Maria stared at the translation, seeing not just words, but the unraveling of 15 years of assumptions. The man whose house she cleaned, whose coffee she made, whose distant politeness had been the most reliable constant in her working life. He wasn't who he claimed to be. Mama, Sophia said softly, this isn't just about a fake identity. This man, your boss, he's running from the Russian mafia. Maria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air seeping through their apartment's thin walls. She thought of all the mornings she'd let herself into that mansion, all the times she'd been alone with Sterling, all the moments when she could have been in the crosshairs of people who wouldn't hesitate to hurt an innocent woman if it served their purposes. The daughter mentioned in the letter, Maria said slowly. Anya, I've never seen any daughter in that house. Maybe she's hidden too, maybe she has a different identity. Sophia leaned forward, her computer science mind already working through the implications. Mama, if this man stole technology from Russian criminals and built a fortune with it, you're working for someone incredibly dangerous. But as Maria sat there, processing this revelation, other memories began to surface. Sterling's late-night phone calls, conducted in what she now realized might have been Russian, the way he sometimes flinched when anyone knocked unexpectedly at the door, his insistence on having the most advanced security system money could buy. The small details that hadn't made sense suddenly formed a pattern. I need to think, Maria said, standing and walking to the window that overlooked the parking lot of their complex 3 floors below. Children played between rusted cars while their parents finished another day of trying to make ends meet. This was her world, predictable, safe in its poverty, honest in its struggles, but for 15 years, she had crossed into another world every morning, a world where a man named Dmitri Volkov had reinvented himself as Robert Sterling and built an empire on stolen secrets. There's something else, Sophia said, her fingers still working across the keyboard. I've been looking up this Mikhail Kozlov mentioned in the letter. She turned the laptop screen toward her mother. He's not just any enforcer. He's wanted by Interpol for murder, money laundering, human trafficking. If he's looking for your boss. Maria felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. She could pretend she'd never seen the letter, never had it translated. She could continue showing up every morning, cleaning house for a man who might be a criminal, but who had always paid her fairly and treated her with respect. She could protect her family by remaining willfully ignorant. Or she could act on the knowledge that somewhere in Beverly Hills, a dangerous man was about to be found by even more dangerous people. What would you do? She asked her daughter. Sophia closed the laptop carefully, as if sealing away the dangerous knowledge they'd uncovered. Mama, you've always taught me that we can't control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond. This man, Sterling, Dmitri, whatever his name is, he might be a criminal, but if killers are coming for him and they might hurt innocent people in the process, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Maria understood in her daughter's careful words. She heard an echo of her own moral code, the same principles that had driven her to work multiple jobs, to keep Sophia in school, to save every penny for her daughter's future, to never compromise her integrity even when it would have been easier to look the other way. That night, Maria lay in her narrow bed staring at the ceiling while Sophia slept in the next room. The apartment was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional argument from the neighbors upstairs. But in her mind she could hear the grandfather clock in Sterling's mansion, ticking away the hours, until something terrible arrived at those iron gates. By morning, she had made her decision. She would confront Sterling, or Dmitri, or whoever he really was. She would tell him that she knew, and she would give him a chance to explain. Maybe he was a victim, like his sister seemed to believe. Maybe he was a criminal who deserved whatever was coming to him. Either way, she couldn't pretend to be invisible anymore. As dawn broke over East La, casting pale light through her curtains, Maria Elena Vasquez prepared for what might be the last day she would ever spend cleaning Robert Sterling's house. Tomorrow everything would be different. Tomorrow the careful boundaries between her world and his would dissolve completely. The translation sat on her kitchen table like a loaded weapon, ready to destroy the quiet life she had built from 15 years of faithful service. But some truths, once discovered, demanded action. Even when that action might cost her everything she had worked so hard to protect, the mansion felt different as Maria entered through the service door that Thursday morning. The very air seemed charged with electricity, as if the house itself knew that secrets were about to be exposed. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down her cleaning supplies, the familiar routine failing to calm her racing heart. Sterling was already in his study when she arrived, seated behind his mahogany desk like a judge awaiting a defendant. But there was something wrong with the picture. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his expensive shirt wrinkled, his steel grey hair uncombed. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept, and Maria noticed his hands were shaking slightly as he gripped his coffee cup. She had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times during the sleepless night, but now that the moment had arrived, the carefully chosen words evaporated from her mind. Instead, she found herself standing in his doorway, holding a dust cloth like a shield, trying to find the courage to speak. "Mr. Sterling," she began, her accented English more pronounced than usual due to her nervousness. He looked up sharply, his eyes focusing on her with an intensity that made her take a step backward. "Maria, you're early today. I need to speak with you," she said, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "About the letter." The effect was immediate and devastating. Sterling's face drained of color, his coffee cup hitting the desk with enough force to splash dark liquid across important-looking documents. He stood so quickly that his chair rolled backward into the bookshelf, and Maria could see the moment when 15 years of careful control simply evaporated. "What letter?" His voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the panic underneath. Maria reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, displaying the photographs she had taken. "The letter from your sister Tatiana, the one addressed to Dmitry Volkov." The silence that followed felt like the pause before an explosion. Sterling, Dmitry, stared at the phone screen, and Maria watched as a dozen different emotions crossed his face: shock, fear, anger, and finally, a desperate kind of calculation. "You read it," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. "My daughter translated it." The words came out steadier than she felt. "We know about Mikhail Kozlov. We know about the danger you're in." For a long moment, they stared at each other across the vast gulf that separated their worlds. She, a working-class immigrant standing in his doorway, and he, a man who had built an empire on lies and stolen secrets. Then Sterling moved with sudden, violent motion, yanking open desk drawers with frantic energy. "How much do you want?" he demanded, pulling out a checkbook. 50,000, 100, name your price." The offer hit Maria like a slap. After 15 years of faithful service, he thought she was here to blackmail him. The assumption stung more than it should have, that in his mind, she was just another person who could be bought, another problem to be solved with money. "I don't want your money," she said, and saw him freeze mid-motion. "I want to know who you really are." Sterling straightened slowly, the checkbook forgotten in his hands. When he looked at her again, his expression had changed completely. Gone was the desperate fear, replaced by something much more dangerous, the cold calculation of a man who had survived the Russian underworld and built a new identity from nothing. "You want to know who I am?" His voice was soft, almost conversational, but Maria could hear the threat underneath. "I'm the man who pays your salary, I'm the man who has kept your family fed for 15 years, and I'm the man who can make your life very, very difficult if you don't walk away from this right now." "People are coming for you," Maria said, refusing to be intimidated. "Dangerous people. What happens to me, to my daughter, when they arrive and find out I work here?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. For just a moment, his carefully constructed facade cracked and she saw something that might have been genuine concern flicker across his features. "You don't understand," he said, moving around the desk toward her. "These aren't people you call the police about. These aren't people who care about collateral damage. The safest thing you can do is pretend you never saw that letter, never had this conversation. And the safest thing for you would be to disappear," Maria replied. "Like your sister suggested." His laugh was harsh, bitter. "Disappear? Do you have any idea what that means? I've been Dmitry Volkov for most of my life, Robert Sterling for 20 years. I don't know how to be anyone else." For a moment, Maria saw not the intimidating billionaire or the dangerous fugitive, but simply a tired man caught between impossible choices. Then his expression hardened again, and she realized the conversation was over. "Pack your things," he said, returning to his desk with swift, decisive movements. "I'm terminating your employment effective immediately." The words hit her like a physical blow, 15 years of her life, dismissed in a single sentence. "Mr. Sterling, there's a severance check here for 6 months' salary," he continued, scribbling across the checkbook with sharp, angry strokes. "In exchange, you'll sign a non-disclosure agreement stating that you've never seen anything unusual in this house, never overheard any private conversations, never had access to any confidential information." He tore the check from the book and held it toward her, but Maria didn't move to take it. The amount written there represented more money than she typically saw in half a year. Enough to keep her family afloat while she looked for new employment. It should have felt like salvation. Instead, it felt like betrayal. "Take the money, Maria," Sterling said, and now his voice held genuine urgency. "Take it and forget you ever worked here. Forget my name, forget this house, forget everything you think you know. It's the only way to keep your family safe." "And what about keeping you safe?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, that she would express concern for his welfare after he had just fired her. "That's not your problem anymore." Maria looked around the study one last time, at the bookshelf where she had discovered the letter, at the desk she had polished countless times, at the windows that overlooked gardens she had admired every morning for 15 years. Then she looked at the man who had just destroyed her livelihood to protect his secrets. "Goodbye, Mr. Sterling," she said quietly. "I hope you find a way to stay alive." She left the check on his desk and walked out of the mansion for what she thought would be the last time, carrying only her cleaning supplies and the weight of knowledge that felt heavier with every step. Behind her, she could hear Sterling making urgent phone calls in a language she now knew was Russian. The drive home to Eastlar felt like traveling between different worlds, from the manicured lawns of Beverly Hills to the cracked sidewalks of her neighborhood, from a life of careful boundaries to an uncertain future where everything familiar had suddenly changed. Sophia was waiting when she arrived home, taking one look at her mother's face and understanding immediately that their lives had just taken another unpredictable turn. "What happened?" she asked as Maria sank into their worn sofa. "I lost my job," Maria said simply, "but I think I might have saved a man's life. Whether that would be enough remained to be seen." 3 days after her dismissal, Maria discovered that unemployment brought its own form of captivity. The walls of their small apartment seemed to close in on her as she sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by job applications and rejection letters, trying to pretend that her world hadn't fundamentally shifted. But every news report, every knock at the door, every unexpected phone call sent her heart racing. Sophia had thrown herself into research with the focused intensity she usually reserved for computer programming. Her laptop was constantly open, tabs filled with articles about Russian organized crime, financial investigations, and something called deep cover identities. The dining table had become a makeshift detective board, covered with printouts and handwritten notes, connected by pieces of string, like something from a crime show. "Look at this," Sophia said, turning her laptop toward her mother. "I've been digging into Robert Sterling's background, and there are inconsistencies everywhere." Maria moved closer, squinting at the screen. Her daughter had pulled up what appeared to be a timeline, marked with dates and question marks. His company, Sterling Tech, was founded 20 years ago with an initial investment of $50 million, Sophia explained, pointing to various entries. But there's no record of where that money came from, no previous business ventures, no family wealth, no bank loans. It's like Robert Sterling just materialized with a fortune and a fully formed tech company. "What about before that?" Maria asked. "That's just it. There is no before that. No birth certificate, no school records, no employment history. Robert Sterling didn't exist until exactly 20 years ago." Sophia's voice dropped to a whisper. "But you know who did disappear around that same time? A Russian tech executive named Dmitry Volkov, who was reportedly killed in a car accident in Moscow, except they never found a body." Maria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the broken air conditioning in their apartment. The man she had worked for, trusted, served coffee to every morning. He was a ghost wearing another man's life. "There's more," Sophia continued, clicking to another tab. "Sterling Tech's early patents are for encryption algorithms and cybersecurity protocols, the same kind of technology that would be incredibly valuable to intelligence agencies or criminal organizations." A knock at their apartment door made both women freeze. Maria glanced at the clock, 7:30 p.m. Too late for mail delivery, Too early for any of their neighbors to be asking for favors. Through the thin door, she could see the shadow of someone standing in the hallway. "Are you expecting anyone?" Sophia whispered. Maria shook her head, approaching the door with cautious steps. The peephole revealed a man in an expensive suit, standing with the kind of stillness that spoke of professional patience. He didn't look like he belonged in their neighborhood. "Mrs. Vasquez." The voice was accented but not Spanish, something Eastern European. "I would like to speak with you about your former employer." Every instinct Maria had developed over 45 years of life screamed danger. She backed away from the door, grabbing Sophia's arm and pulling her toward the bedroom. "We're not interested," Maria called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "I think you misunderstand," the man replied, his tone remaining conversational. "This is not a request." Sophia was already moving, grabbing her laptop and phone while Maria looked frantically around the bedroom for anything that could serve as a weapon. The man continued talking through the door, his words measured and calm in a way that made them infinitely more terrifying. "We know you have been in contact with the man you call Robert Sterling. We know you have seen certain documents. We are not here to hurt you, Mrs. Vasquez. We simply want to talk." "About what?" Maria found herself saying before she could stop herself. "About where we can find Dmitry Volkov." The name hung in the air like a confession. These were the people Tatiana had warned about in her letter, the ones who had been hunting Sterling across 2 decades and 2 continents, and somehow they had traced the connection back to her. Sophia was frantically typing on her phone, probably calling 911, but Maria wondered what good the police would do against people who operated across international borders and had the resources to track down a single housekeeper in a city of millions. "I don't know anyone by that name," Maria called out, but even as she said it, she knew it was useless. "Mrs. Vasquez, your daughter Sophia attends UCLA. She is in her 2nd year studying computer science. She drives a blue Honda Civic license plate 8G47J92. She works part-time at a coffee shop on Westwood Boulevard." The specific details hit Maria like physical blows. They knew about Sophia. They had been watching, following, gathering information about her family while she went about her normal life, completely oblivious to the danger. "What do you want?" Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Information. Sterling's address, his security arrangements, his daily routine, details about the house where you worked. In exchange, we forget we ever met your family." Maria thought about the mansion's layout, the security system she had helped Sterling test over the years, the hidden safe behind the bookshelf that he thought no one knew about. She thought about 15 years of accumulated knowledge about a man's private life, information that could be used to destroy him. She also thought about the terror in Sterling's eyes when she had confronted him about the letter, the desperate way he had offered her money, the genuine concern in his voice when he warned her to forget everything she knew. "I need time to think," she said. "Of course, we are reasonable people." The man's voice carried a smile she couldn't see but could certainly hear. "We will contact you again tomorrow evening. I trust you will have made the correct decision by then." Footsteps moved away from the door, but Maria waited a full 10 minutes before approaching the peephole again. The hallway was empty, but somehow that felt more ominous than seeing the man standing there. Sophia had managed to reach 911, but when the police arrived 20 minutes later, they found nothing suspicious. No evidence of threats, no sign of forced entry, no way to prove that a conversation through a closed door constituted criminal intimidation. The officers took a report and promised to increase patrols in the area, but Maria could see in their eyes that they thought she was a nervous immigrant overreacting to a misunderstanding after the police left. Mother and daughter sat in their living room with the lights off, looking out through the curtains at the parking lot below. Every shadow seemed to hide a watcher, every parked car a potential threat. "Mama," Sophia said quietly, "these people, they're not going to just go away, are they?" Maria thought about the man's voice, the casual way he had recited details about their lives, the patient certainty that she would give him what he wanted. "No, Mika, they're not. So what do we do?" Maria looked at her daughter, brilliant, brave, with her whole life ahead of her, and made a decision that would change everything once again. "We warn him," she said. "Whatever Sterling has done, whatever he's running from, we warn him that they found us. And then we pray that 15 years of loyalty means something to a man who's been lying about everything else." Outside their window, the city lights twinkled like stars, beautiful and distant and offering no comfort at all. The abandoned diner on Crenshaw Boulevard looked like the kind of place where dreams went to die. Its neon sign flickered intermittently, casting sickly pink light across cracked asphalt and promising world's best coffee, to anyone desperate enough to believe such claims, it was exactly the sort of anonymous, forgotten corner of Los Angeles where a billionaire could meet a former housekeeper without attracting attention. Maria arrived first, sliding into a booth near the back where she could watch both the entrance and the emergency exit. Her hands shook as she gripped a cup of coffee that tasted like bitter water. But she forced herself to appear calm. The call to Sterling had been the hardest conversation of her life, telling him about the visitor, about the threats, about the choice she was being forced to make. When Sterling finally walked through the door, she barely recognized him. Gone was the polished executive who commanded boardrooms and built empires. In his place stood a man who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Wearing jeans and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, he moved with the careful awareness of someone who expected danger from every direction. He slid into the booth across from her, and for a moment, they simply stared at each other. Two people whose lives had become fatally intertwined through circumstances neither had chosen. "You could have given them what they wanted," he said quietly. "My address, my security codes, my daily routine. Why didn't you?" Maria considered the question, thinking about all the reasons she should have cooperated with the men who threatened her family. "Because 15 years means something to me. Even if it doesn't to you." Something flickered across his expression. Pain, perhaps, or recognition. "You think I fired you easily. You think these 15 years meant nothing. You offered me money to disappear," she replied. "What else was I supposed to think?" Sterling Dmitri was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his hands. When he looked up again, his eyes held a weariness that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than physical exhaustion. "My name is Dmitri Volkov," he said, and hearing the admission spoken aloud felt like watching a carefully constructed dam finally give way. 20 years ago, I was a software engineer in Moscow, working for a company that had contracts with both the government and less official organizations." Maria waited, sensing that this was a story he had never told anyone, a truth he had buried so deeply that excavating it was causing him physical pain. "The company I worked for was developing encryption software for the FSB, Russian intelligence, but my boss, Pavel Kozlov, was also selling copies to the Bratva, organized crime families who needed secure communications for their operations." Dmitri's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I discovered the double dealing, and like an idealistic fool, I thought I could report it through proper channels. What happened? Pavel's son, Mikhail, the man your visitors mentioned, discovered my plans. The night before I was supposed to meet with federal prosecutors, they came for me, burned down my apartment with me supposedly inside, killed my girlfriend to make sure she couldn't contradict their story." His jaw clenched. "But I had suspected something like this might happen. I had already copied the encryption algorithms, transferred what money I could access, and arranged for a new identity through contacts in the American intelligence community." Maria felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "So you became Robert Sterling. The CIA wanted those algorithms badly enough to give me a new life in exchange, but what they didn't know was that I had also taken evidence of how deeply Russian organized crime had penetrated both the government and technology sectors, information that could destroy dozens of powerful people on both sides of the Atlantic." The weight of this revelation settled on Maria like a physical burden. She had been working for a man who possessed secrets valuable enough to justify 20 years of hiding, powerful enough to bring down governments, dangerous enough to get anyone who knew them killed. "The encryption algorithms I stole became the foundation of Sterling Tech," Dmitri continued, his voice hollow with guilt. "Every dollar I made, every success I achieved, it was all built on theft and betrayal and the blood of people who trusted me." "But you were trying to do the right thing," Maria said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "I were trying to expose corruption." "Was I?" His laugh was bitter. "Or was I just a coward who ran when things got difficult? Do you know how many people have died because I disappeared with that information instead of staying to fight?" Maria studied his face, seeing not the confident billionaire she had served for 15 years, but a man haunted by choices made in desperation. "How many people would have died if you had stayed?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "What do you mean? If you had been killed that night in Moscow, if those algorithms had remained with the criminals, if that evidence had never made it to American intelligence, how many more people would have suffered?" For the first time since entering the diner, Dmitri looked directly at her, and Maria saw something shift in his expression. "I never thought about it that way. Maybe it's time you did." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "These people who are looking for you, they're not just after the money or the technology, are they?" No, he admitted. They want the evidence, the files that could expose how deeply the Bratva has penetrated legitimate businesses, government agencies, intelligence services, information that could destroy their operations across 3 continents. Then hiding isn't enough anymore, is it? Dmitri was quiet for a long moment, staring out the diner's grimy window at the traffic passing on Crenshaw. When he spoke again, his voice carried a resolution that hadn't been there before. "I have a daughter," he said quietly. "Anya, she's 22 now, living in Portland under the name Anna Sterling. She thinks her father is a tech executive who travels too much for work. She has no idea that her real name is Anya Volkova, that she's the daughter of a Russian fugitive, that people have been hunting her for her entire life." Maria felt her heart constrict. A daughter, hidden and protected, living a lie as elaborate as her father's. "The people who came to my apartment, they mentioned a daughter. They know about her, which means she's not safe anymore either." Dmitri's hands clenched into fists on the table. "For 20 years, I've been running, hiding, telling myself I was protecting her by staying away. But I can't run anymore. If I don't act now, they'll find her, and they'll use her to get to me. What are you going to do?" "What I should have done 20 years ago," he said, pulling out a phone Maria had never seen before. "I'm going to fight back." As he dialed a number, Maria realized that everything was about to change again. The careful balance of her life, already disrupted by her dismissal and the threats against her family, was about to be shattered completely. But looking at the man across from her, no longer the distant employer who had paid her wages, but a human being wrestling with impossible choices, she understood that some fights were worth the risk. "Agent Mitchell," Dmitri said into the phone, his voice suddenly carrying the authority she remembered from his business calls. "This is Robert Sterling. I need to come in from the cold." The conversation that followed was brief, cryptic, and conducted in a mixture of English and what sounded like intelligence jargon. When he hung up, Dmitri looked at Maria with an expression that held both determination and fear. "The FBI has been waiting for this call for 20 years, he said. "They're going to want to know everything, about the algorithms, about the evidence, about the Bratva connections. In exchange, they'll offer protection for both me and Anya." "What about my family?" Maria asked. "What about Sophia and me?" "That depends," Dmitri said, his grey eyes meeting hers with uncomfortable honesty. "How far are you willing to go to see this through? Because once we start down this path, there's no going back. These people don't forgive and they don't forget." Maria thought about Sophia, brilliant and brave and deserving of a future free from fear. She thought about 15 years of cleaning house for a man who had turned out to be someone else entirely. She thought about the choice between safety and justice, between hiding and fighting, between the life she had known and the uncertain path ahead. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Dmitri's smile was the first genuine expression she had seen from him since that morning in his study. "I need you to help me save my daughter, and maybe, if we're very lucky and very careful, we can save ourselves too." Outside the diner, Los Angeles continued its relentless motion. Traffic flowing, people rushing toward their destinations. The great machine of the city grinding forward without pause. But inside the forgotten booth where a Russian fugitive and a Mexican housekeeper planned to take on an international criminal organization, time seemed suspended, holding its breath for whatever would come next. The federal building in downtown Los Angeles rose like a monument to bureaucratic power, its glass and steel facade reflecting the morning sun while hiding the secrets contained within its walls. Maria had never imagined she would walk through its security checkpoints, but here she was, following Dmitri through metal detectors and past armed guards who looked at them with the practiced indifference of people who had seen every kind of human desperation. Agent Sarah Mitchell was not what Maria had expected. In her late 30s, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that missed nothing, she looked more like a soccer mom than someone who hunted international criminals. But when she spoke, her voice carried an authority that made it clear she was very, very good at her job. "Mr. Volkov," she said, emphasizing his real name as they settled into a sterile conference room. "It's been 20 years since our last communication. I was beginning to think you were dead." "Some days I wished I was," Dmitri replied, and Maria heard the weight of 2 decades in those words. Agent Mitchell opened a thick file that looked like it had been accumulating dust in some government warehouse. "We've been tracking Mikhail Kozlov's organization for 15 years. They've expanded far beyond anything we imagined when you first provided us with those encryption algorithms. Human trafficking, money laundering, cybercrime. They're operating in 12 countries now, and the evidence I gave you has been extremely valuable in building cases against mid-level operators. But Kozlov himself has remained untouchable. He's learned to insulate himself behind layers of legitimate businesses and political connections. Mitchell's eyes were sharp as she studied Dmitri's face. Until now, she slid a photograph across the table. It showed a man in his 50s with cold eyes and scars that spoke of a violent past. Maria recognized him immediately. It was the face from her nightmares, the voice that had threatened her family through her apartment door. Mikhail Kozlov arrived in Los Angeles 3 days ago, Mitchell continued. He's here for you, Mr. Volkov. Our intelligence suggests he's tired of the long hunt and ready to take risks he wouldn't have taken before. What kind of risks? Maria asked, surprised by her own boldness in speaking up. Mitchell's attention shifted to her with laser focus. Mrs. Vasquez, isn't it? The one who discovered the letter from his sister. She consulted another file. You have a daughter, Sophia, 19 years old UCLA student. The casual mention of Sophia sent ice through Maria's veins. How do you know about my daughter? Because we've been watching you since the moment you photographed that letter, Mitchell said matter-of-factly. Standard protocol when civilians become involved in ongoing investigations. It's how we knew about your visitor the other night. You were watching us, and you let that man threaten my family. Maria's voice rose despite her attempt to stay calm. We let him reveal himself, Mitchell corrected. Sometimes the best way to catch a predator is to let him think he's hunting. Dmitri leaned forward, his expression dangerous. Are you telling me you used Maria as bait? I'm telling you that Mrs. Vasquez made a choice to contact you instead of cooperating with Kozlov's people. That choice put her family at risk, but it also gave us the opportunity we've been waiting for. Mitchell's voice was steady. Professional. Kozlov is getting desperate. He's making mistakes. The conference room door burst open, and a younger agent rushed in with the kind of urgency that made everyone's blood run cold. Agent Mitchell, we have a problem, he said, barely pausing to catch his breath. Kozlov's people just grabbed the Vasquez girl from the UCLA campus. The world tilted sideways. Maria felt the words hit her like physical blows, each syllable driving deeper into her chest until she couldn't breathe. Sophia, her brilliant, brave daughter who was supposed to be safe in her computer lab, surrounded by other students and campus security, and all the normal protections of ordinary life. When? Mitchell's voice was sharp, controlled. 15 minutes ago, 2 men approached her outside the library. Witnesses say it looked like a normal conversation at first, but then they got into a black SUV with her. She didn't appear to be struggling, because they told her it was the only way to keep her mother alive, Dmitri said quietly, and Maria could hear his own guilt in the words. Maria stood on unsteady legs, the room spinning around her. We have to find her, we have to… Sit down, Mrs. Vasquez, Mitchell said, not unkindly. We will find her. This is what Kozlov wants. Panic, mistakes, emotional reactions that lead to poor decisions. This is my daughter, Maria's voice cracked with desperate fury. And she's alive because she's valuable to them, Mitchell replied with brutal pragmatism. They need her as leverage. That gives us time. The younger agent handed Mitchell a cell phone. Kozlov's already made contact. He wants to speak to Volkov. Mitchell put the phone on speaker, and suddenly the conference room was filled with the voice that had haunted Maria's dreams. Cultured, patient, absolutely certain of his power. Dmitri, my old friend, Kozlov's voice purred through the speaker. It has been too long. Let the girl go, Mikhail, Dmitri said, his own voice steady despite the tension radiating from his body. She has nothing to do with this. On the contrary, she has everything to do with this. She is the daughter of the woman who works for you, the woman who has seen things she should not have seen. She is leverage. Dmitri, currency in a transaction that is long overdue. What do you want? You know what I want, the files you stole 20 years ago, the evidence that could destroy everything I have built. And of course, the location of your own daughter, sweet little Anya, who thinks she is Anna Sterling and has no idea how much danger she is in. Maria felt the blood drain from her face. They knew about Dmitri's daughter too. How many lives would be destroyed before this was over? I need proof that Sophia is alive and unharmed, Dmitri said. There was a pause followed by Sophia's voice, strained but clearly trying to sound brave. Mama, I'm okay, they haven't hurt me. But Mama, don't give them what they want, whatever it is, it's not worth… The phone went dead. The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Maria stared at the speaker, desperate to hear her daughter's voice again, to know that she was still breathing, still fighting, still the brilliant girl who had translated a Russian letter and inadvertently set all of this in motion. We have 24 hours, Mitchell said, consulting her watch. That's Kozlov's standard timeline for negotiations. After that, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Dmitri stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city where somewhere a 19-year-old girl was being held by people who viewed human life as a business expense. When he turned back to the room, his expression had changed completely. "I'm going to give him what he wants," he said quietly. "The hell you are," Mitchell replied immediately. "Those files are the only thing keeping you alive. The moment Kozlov has them, you become a liability he can eliminate. Then we make sure he doesn't get the chance," Dmitri said, looking directly at Maria. "But first we get Sophia back." Maria met his gaze and saw something she had never seen in 15 years of working for him: absolute commitment to protecting someone else, regardless of the cost to himself. For the first time since this nightmare began, she allowed herself to hope that her daughter might survive. But hope, she was learning, was a dangerous thing when dealing with people who had spent 20 years perfecting the art of destroying lives. The safe house in Culver City looked like the kind of modest suburban home where families raised children and tended gardens, where the biggest concerns were mortgage payments and little league schedules. The illusion was perfect, down to the newspapers scattered on the front porch and the minivan in the driveway. Only the subtle modifications, reinforced windows, multiple exit routes, and communication equipment disguised as everyday electronics, hinted at its true purpose. Maria sat in the living room that evening, surrounded by FBI agents who spoke in careful, measured tones about operational parameters and acceptable risk levels. But all she could think about was Sophia, somewhere in the city, probably scared and confused and wondering if her mother would find a way to save her. "The exchange will happen tomorrow night at the port of Los Angeles," Agent Mitchell explained, spreading maps across the coffee table. "Warehouse District, Container Terminal 47. It's isolated enough that Kozlov will feel secure, but accessible enough for our teams to position themselves strategically." Dmitri studied the maps with the focused intensity of someone whose life depended on understanding every detail. "He'll have multiple escape routes planned, boats, helicopters, probably cars staged at various points around the port. We're counting on it," Mitchell replied. "The more elaborate his exit strategy, the more opportunities we have to intercept him." "And if something goes wrong," Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "if he realizes it's a trap and decides to—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but everyone in the room understood what she was asking. "Mrs. Vasquez," Mitchell said, turning to face her directly, "I need you to understand something. Your daughter is valuable to Kozlov only as long as she can be used as leverage. Once he has what he wants from Mr. Volkov, that value disappears. Our best chance of getting her back alive is to ensure the exchange happens exactly as planned, which means I need to convince him that I'm really willing to trade 20 years of evidence for one girl's life," Dmitri added grimly. "Are you?" Maria asked, studying his face. Dmitri was quiet for a moment, his grey eyes distant. "Your daughter translated that letter because she wanted to help. She became involved in this mess because she cared about doing the right thing. In a way, she's more like her mother than either of you probably realize." Maria felt tears threatening and pushed them back. Now wasn't the time for emotion. "That doesn't answer my question." "Yes," Dmitri said simply. "I would trade those files for Sophia's life, but I don't think we'll have to." Mitchell looked up from the maps. "The files Mr. Volkov originally provided to us 20 years ago have been our foundation for understanding Russian organized crime in America, but the landscape has changed. Kozlov's organization has evolved, adapted, developed new methods and new contacts. What we need now isn't just the old evidence, it's real-time intelligence about current operations." "You want me to wear a wire?" Dmitri said. It wasn't a question. "We want you to get Kozlov talking. Let him gloat. Let him explain how clever he's been. Let him reveal details about his current network that we can use to dismantle the entire organization. And if he discovers the wire, that's why Mrs. Vasquez is going to be our insurance policy." Maria felt the room's attention shift to her, and suddenly she understood why she had been brought to this safe house, why her opinion had been solicited, why she had been included in planning sessions that should have involved only federal agents and their star witness. "You want me to be there," she said. "Kozlov's people have been watching you, threatening you, using you as a pressure point against Mr. Volkov," Mitchell explained. "In their minds, you're not a threat. You're a tool, a housekeeper who stumbled into something bigger than she could understand. But I could be more than that. Much more. You know Mr. Volkov better than anyone. You've spent 15 years observing him, learning his patterns, understanding how he thinks and reacts. If something goes wrong during the exchange, if Kozlov becomes suspicious or the situation starts to deteriorate, You might be the only person who can keep him calm long enough for us to extract both you and your daughter safely." Maria looked around the room at the assembled agents, all of them experienced professionals who had dedicated their careers to fighting international crime. And yet they were asking her, a middle-aged housekeeper with a high school education and no training in law enforcement, to help them take down one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the world. "You realize I have no idea what I'm doing," she said. "Neither did I 20 years ago," Dmitri replied. "But sometimes not knowing what you're doing is an advantage. It makes you unpredictable." Agent Mitchell spread another set of documents across the table. "There's something else you need to know about the mansion employee who's been feeding information to Kozlov's people." Maria felt her blood turn cold. "Someone inside the house. James Crawford. Your replacement. He was hired 3 days after you were dismissed, according to our investigation. He's actually Yuri Petrov, a Russian national with connections to Kozlov's organization. His job was to maintain surveillance on Mr. Volkov and report on his activities." The betrayal hit Maria like a physical blow. Her position, the job she had held faithfully for 15 years, had been filled by a spy whose only purpose was to gather intelligence for the people hunting Dmitri. "How long have you known this?" Dmitri asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "We suspect it from the moment he was hired. His credentials were too perfect, his availability too convenient. We've been feeding him carefully selected false information through our surveillance of the house, including details about tomorrow's exchange." Mitchell smiled grimly. "Mr. Petrov believes the meeting is scheduled for midnight at a warehouse in San Pedro. He's already passed that information along to his handlers, while Kozlov's people are setting up an ambush 20 miles away. We'll be conducting the real exchange at the port of Los Angeles." Maria felt a surge of something that might have been pride. The FBI had been planning this operation with the same attention to detail she had once devoted to maintaining Dmitri's household. Every element carefully considered, every contingency planned for, every possible mistake anticipated and countered. "What happens after tomorrow?" she asked. "Assuming everything goes according to plan and we get Sophia back." "Witness protection for both of you," Mitchell said. "New identities, relocation to somewhere far from Los Angeles, federal assistance in building new lives." Maria thought about her small apartment, her neighborhood, the community she had been part of for nearly 2 decades. Everything familiar would disappear, just as it had for Dmitri 20 years earlier. "And if I refuse, then you spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering when Kozlov's people will decide you know too much to be allowed to live." The choice, Maria realized, had been taken away from her the moment she decided to translate that letter. There was no path back to her old life, no way to return to the comfortable anonymity of being invisible. Tomorrow night, in a warehouse by the ocean, she would help attempt to rescue her daughter and capture one of the most dangerous men in the world. The woman who had spent 15 years cleaning other people's messes was about to create the biggest mess of her life. But for Sophia, for the brilliant girl who had inherited her mother's sense of justice and her father's abandoned dreams, it was a risk worth taking. The port of Los Angeles at night was a cathedral of industrial power. Massive cranes reaching toward stars obscured by marine layer fog, container ships floating like metal islands in the dark water, and the constant symphony of machinery that never slept. Warehouse 47 sat at the edge of this mechanical landscape, isolated enough to provide privacy, but close enough to escape routes that led to international waters. Maria crouched behind a stack of shipping containers 200 yards from the warehouse, wearing a bulletproof vest that felt heavier than any burden she had ever carried. The FBI communications equipment in her ear crackled with static and whispered updates from agents positioned throughout the terminal. "Target vehicle approaching from the south," came Agent Mitchell's voice. "Black Mercedes, 3 occupants visible." Through night vision binoculars provided by the tactical team, Maria watched as the car pulled up to the warehouse's loading dock. 2 men emerged first, professional, careful, scanning their surroundings with the practiced awareness of people who had survived by being paranoid. Then came Mikhail Kozlov himself. Even at this distance, he projected an aura of controlled violence, 50s silver-haired, moving with the confident stride of someone who had never doubted his ability to hurt people until they gave him what he wanted. This was the man who had been hunting Dmitri for 20 years, who had kidnapped her daughter, who had turned her safe, predictable life into a nightmare of federal agents and witness protection programs. "Second vehicle approaching from the east," Mitchell reported. "That should be Volkov." Dmitri's car, a rented sedan that looked appropriately desperate and defeated, pulled up to the opposite side of the warehouse. Maria watched him emerge, carrying an aluminum briefcase that supposedly contained 20 years of carefully guarded evidence. Even from her hiding place, she could see the tension in his shoulders. The way he kept glancing toward the warehouse doors as if expecting an ambush. "All units maintain position," Mitchell's voice commanded. "Let them get inside and start talking before we move." The warehouse doors opened, spilling industrial light across the dock. Maria could see figures moving inside. Kozlov's men positioning themselves strategically, Dmitri walking toward what might be his death, and somewhere in that cavernous space. "Sophia, Maria, can you see the interior?" Mitchell asked through the comm system. "Partially," Maria whispered, adjusting her position behind the containers. "There's a smaller room built inside the main warehouse. Like an office, I can see lights, but I can't see the people." "Understood. Maintain visual contact if anything goes wrong. If you see any indication that the situation is deteriorating, you get out of there immediately. Do not try to be a hero." But even as she acknowledged the instruction, Maria knew she wouldn't follow it. Sophia was in that warehouse, and no amount of federal training or tactical preparation would make her abandon her daughter. The minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. Through her earpiece, Maria could hear fragments of conversation picked up by Dmitri's wire, Kozlov's cultured voice demanding proof that the files were genuine, Dmitri's careful responses designed to keep the negotiation moving forward, and underneath it all, the terrible tension of two men who had been hunting and hunted for 2 decades finally facing each other. "Where is the girl?" she heard Dmitri ask. "Safe," came Kozlov's reply. "But eager to see her mother, I'm sure. Tell me, Dmitri, does the housekeeper know what kind of man she's been working for? Does she understand that her employer is a thief and a traitor?" "She knows enough." "I doubt that. I doubt she knows about the people who died because you ran away with information that could have saved them. I doubt she knows about the families destroyed because you chose your own safety over justice." Maria felt anger flare in her chest. Even through the electronic distortion of the communications equipment, she could hear Kozlov's manipulation, his attempt to break down Dmitri's confidence and make him doubt the choices that had led to this moment. "The files, Dmitri, hand them over, and we can end this charade. Sophia first, I want to see her confirm she's unharmed." A door opened somewhere in the warehouse, and Maria heard footsteps. Then Sophia's voice, strained but strong, trying to project courage she probably didn't feel. "I'm okay," Sophia said, and Maria had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. "They haven't hurt me, but I want to go home." "You will, Mika," Dmitri replied. And Maria heard genuine tenderness in his voice. "Very soon." Then everything went wrong at once. "This is interesting," Kozlov said, and his tone had changed completely, from businesslike negotiation to dangerous amusement. "Do you know what I found when I had my people search the girl's belongings? A GPS tracker, very sophisticated, military grade, the kind of device that federal agents use to monitor high-value targets." Maria's blood turned to ice. The FBI had equipped Sophia with a tracking device without telling them, standard procedure for kidnapping victims. But somehow Kozlov had discovered it. "You disappoint me, Dmitri," Kozlov continued. 20 years of exile, and you still haven't learned that I'm always 3 steps ahead." Through her earpiece, Maria heard Dmitri's voice, carefully controlled. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't. Just as you don't know about the federal agents positioned around this warehouse, or the wire you're wearing, or the elaborate trap you thought you were setting for me." The warehouse lights suddenly went out, plunging the entire terminal into darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, casting everything in hellish red shadows. "All units, move in!" Mitchell's voice crackled through the comm system. "Subjects are aware of surveillance. Repeat, suspects know about the operation." Maria heard gunfire from inside the warehouse, short, controlled bursts that spoke of professional training and deadly intent. She rose from her hiding place and ran toward the building, ignoring Mitchell's earlier instructions, ignoring her own terror, focusing only on the fact that her daughter was inside with people who no longer had any reason to keep her alive. The warehouse's side door had been left open in Kozlov's escape planning. Maria slipped inside and found herself in a maze of shipping containers and industrial equipment. The main floor was bathed in emergency lighting, and she could see muzzle flashes from the elevated office area where the exchange had been taking place. "Sophia!" she called out, not caring if it gave away her position. "Mama!" The answer came from her left. Somewhere behind a stack of wooden crates, Maria ran toward the sound, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear the gunfire around her. She found Sophia bound to a chair in a small storage area. guarded by a single man who was more focused on the battle raging outside than on his prisoner. "Hey!" Maria shouted, and when the guard turned toward her, she swung the heavy flashlight the FBI had given her with all the strength she had developed from 15 years of physical labor. The man dropped, and Maria was already cutting Sophia's restraints with a knife she had taken from the safe house kitchen. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her hands shaking as she worked. "No, but Mama, we have to help him. Mr. Sterling, Dmitri, he's still up there and they were going to kill him." Through the warehouse's industrial windows, Maria could see federal agents moving in tactical formation, surrounding the building and calling for surrender through megaphones. But she could also hear continued gunfire from the office area, which meant the situation was far from resolved. "Can you run?" she asked Sophia. "Yes." "Then we get out of here, now." They ran through the warehouse together, mother and daughter, dodging between containers and machinery, while agents and criminals fought a battle that would determine whether 20 years of hiding had been worth the cost. Behind them, Maria could hear Kozlov's voice. No longer cultured and controlled, but wild with fury and desperation. "Dmitri, you cannot run forever. I will find you, and I will find your daughter, and I will finish what my father started." But they were already outside, breathing salt air and feeling ocean wind. Alive and together and free, federal agents surrounded them immediately, checking for injuries, confirming their identities, beginning the process of extracting them from a situation that had gone far beyond anyone's ability to control. In the distance, Maria could see helicopters approaching across the water, their searchlights cutting through the fog like mechanical angels. Tomorrow would bring new identities, new lives, new challenges. But tonight, she held her daughter close and listened to the sound of justice finally. After 20 years of waiting being served, the last thing she heard before the medical team led them away was a single gunshot from inside the warehouse, followed by silence that felt like the end of something that had been too long in coming. 6 months later, Maria Elena Santos, she had chosen to keep her first name and take her grandmother's maiden name, stood in the kitchen of a modest house in Asheville, North Carolina, watching her daughter, now Sophia Santos, finish her breakfast before heading to her new university. The morning light filtered through curtains she had sewn herself, illuminating a life that was simultaneously foreign and familiar. The house was smaller than their old apartment in East LA, but it was theirs, purchased with federal assistance and the grateful generosity of a man who now went by the name David Sterling, who had insisted on setting up trust funds for both women before disappearing into his own witness protection program. The neighborhood was quiet, tree-lined, filled with the kind of people who waved hello from their front porches and brought casseroles when someone was sick. It had taken months for Maria to stop feeling like an imposter in this peaceful place. The woman who had cleaned mansions for 15 years still sometimes wondered if she deserved a home where she was the one being served, where neighbors offered to help with yard work, where the local grocery store manager knew her name, where she could walk to the library without fear of being followed by men in expensive suits. "I still can't believe you're studying cybersecurity," Maria said, refilling Sophia's coffee cup. "Someone has to understand how people like Kozlov operate," Sophia replied, not looking up from her laptop where she was reviewing code that looked no less mysterious to Maria than it had 6 months ago. "Besides, the FBI offered me an internship after graduation, apparently. Having practical experience with international crime looks good on a resume." Maria smiled at her daughter's dry humor, a defense mechanism they had both developed to deal with the surreal circumstances that had brought them to North Carolina. The nightmares had mostly stopped, replaced by a cautious optimism about futures they were still learning to imagine. Sophia had thrown herself into her studies with the same intensity she had once applied to translating Russian letters. As if knowledge could build walls against the chaos they had survived, the transition hadn't been easy for either of them. Maria had spent the first month jumping at every unexpected sound, checking locks twice before bed, positioning herself near windows so she could see approaching cars. The FBI therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Patricia Wells, who specialized in helping civilians who had been thrust into criminal investigations, had explained that hypervigilance was normal, that their brains had been rewired by trauma and would need time to understand that they were truly safe. "Your nervous system doesn't know the difference between a real threat and a perceived one, Doctor," Wells had explained during one of their sessions. "It's going to take time for your body to believe what your mind knows, that Kozlov is dead, that his organization has been dismantled, that you're protected here." The sessions had helped, but it was the small daily rhythms of normal life that had truly begun to heal them. Sophia's classes at UNC Asheville, where she was completing her computer science degree, Maria's part-time job at the local community center, teaching English to other immigrants who were building new lives in unfamiliar places, the garden she had planted behind their house, where tomatoes and peppers grew in neat rows that reminded her of her grandmother's farm in Michoacán. A knock at the front door interrupted her thoughts. Maria glanced at Sophia, who shrugged. They weren't expecting anyone, and unexpected visitors still made both women nervous, despite Agent Mitchell's assurances that Kozlov's organization had been effectively dismantled. Through the peephole, Maria saw a young woman with dark hair and grey eyes that were immediately, unmistakably familiar. Her heart began to race, not with fear this time, but with recognition and a strange kind of joy. The woman on the porch was young, maybe 22, with dark hair and grey eyes that Maria recognized immediately. She was tall, confident, with the kind of educational polish that came from expensive schools and careful cultivation. But underneath that surface, Maria could see something else, a wariness that spoke of recently learned truths about the world and her place in it. "Mrs. Santos," the young woman said, her voice carrying just a hint of her father's accent. "My name is Anna Sterling. I think you knew my father." Maria's heart stopped for a moment. Dmitri's daughter, Anya Volkova, who had grown up believing she was the child of a tech executive, who had lived her entire life protected by lies that had finally crumbled when federal agents arrived at her door in Portland with explanations that must have seemed like science fiction. "Please come in," Maria said, stepping aside to welcome her. Anna entered the house with careful steps, taking in the modest furnishings and family photos with the curiosity of someone trying to understand how ordinary people lived. Sophia looked up from her laptop, and Maria watched the two young women size each other up, both changed by circumstances beyond their control, both trying to figure out who they were now that everything they had believed about their lives had been revealed as elaborate fiction. "Your father," Maria said carefully, gesturing for Anna to sit at the kitchen table. "How is he?" Anna's smile was complicated, holding layers of emotion that Maria recognized from her own experience of having her world turned upside down. "He's mod adapting. They moved him to somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. I can't know exactly where, of course. We talk once a month through secure channels. He's learning to be someone new again." "That must be difficult," Sophia said, closing her laptop and giving Anna her full attention, "having your entire identity change overnight." "You would know," Anna replied, studying Sophia with obvious curiosity. "Agent Mitchell told me about what you went through. See, about how your mother chose to protect my father instead of taking the safe way out." Maria felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I did what anyone would have done." "No," Anna said firmly. "You didn't. Most people would have taken Kozlov's offer, given him the information he wanted, and hoped that would be enough to keep their family safe. You chose to trust a man you'd worked for but never really known, to believe that doing the right thing was worth risking everything you had." The weight of those words settled over the kitchen like morning mist. Maria thought about that night in the abandoned diner when she had made the choice to warn Dmitri instead of cooperating with his enemies. At the time, it had felt like the only option her conscience would allow. Looking back, she could see how easily everything could have gone differently. "Your father saved my daughter's life," Maria said simply. "He risked everything to make sure Sophia came home safely." "And you saved his," Anna replied. "Agent Mitchell showed me the transcripts from the warehouse when Kozlov's men were closing in, when it looked like the whole operation was going to collapse. You were the one who created enough distraction for the FBI to move in effectively." Maria remembered that night differently, as chaos and terror and desperate improvisation, as a mother doing whatever was necessary to protect her child. But perhaps that was what heroism actually looked like from the inside. Not the clean narratives of movies and books, but messy, frightened people making impossible choices and somehow finding the courage to see them through. "I brought you something," Anna said, reaching into a leather satchel that probably cost more than Maria's monthly salary. She pulled out a manila envelope, thick with documents and photographs. "Agent Mitchell cleared these for release. She thought you might want to know what came of everything you went through." Maria opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The first document was a Department of Justice press release announcing the dismantling of what they called one of the most sophisticated international criminal organizations operating in the United States. The second was a list of arrests, dozens of names, most of them unfamiliar, but she recognized a few from the conversations she had overheard during her years cleaning Sterling's house. "Kozlov's network was bigger than anyone realized," Anna explained, as Maria read through the documents. The evidence my father provided, combined with the intelligence gathered during the warehouse operation, led to arrests in 12 countries, human trafficking rings, money laundering operations, cybercrime syndicates, all of it connected to the organization that had been hunting him for 20 years. There were photographs too, surveillance shots of arrests being made, wealthy men in expensive suits being led away in handcuffs, mansions and yachts being seized by federal agents. Maria recognized some of the faces from social pages she had seen while cleaning Sterling's study, powerful people who had seemed untouchable in their wealth and influence. "This man," she said, pointing to one of the photographs, "I saw him at the house several times. He always made me nervous." "Viktor Petrov," Anna said, reading from a document. "Kozlov's lieutenant in Los Angeles. He was running human trafficking operations out of a dozen legitimate businesses. The FBI estimates he was responsible for smuggling over 3,000 people into the country for forced labor." The number hit Maria like a physical blow. 3,000 lives, families torn apart, children sold into slavery, women forced into prostitution, all enabled by the organization that had threatened her daughter, that had turned her quiet life into a nightmare of federal agents and witness protection programs. "How your mother's courage," Anna continued, looking directly at Sophia, "didn't just save my father's life, it helped free thousands of people who were trapped in situations they couldn't escape." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but thoughtful. "It doesn't feel real yet. 6 months ago, I was just a college student trying to pass my programming classes. Now you're telling me that translating a letter helped bring down an international crime syndicate. That's the thing about ordinary people doing extraordinary things," Anna said with a slight smile. "It never feels extraordinary to the people doing it. It just feels like the right thing to do." Maria stood and moved to the window, looking out at the quiet street where children rode bicycles and neighbors tended their gardens. It was a world away from the violence and fear that had dominated those terrible weeks in Los Angeles, but the echoes remained. In her dreams, she still sometimes found herself running through that warehouse, searching for Sophia in the darkness. In quiet moments, she still felt the weight of the choice she had made in the diner when Dmitri first told her the truth about his identity. "There's something else," Anna said, her voice becoming more personal, less formal. "I wanted to thank you not just for protecting my father, but for giving me the chance to know who he really is." Maria turned back to the table, seeing something vulnerable in Anna's expression that hadn't been there before. "For 20 years, I thought my father was someone who cared more about his business than his family," Anna continued. "Someone who sent money instead of spending time, who missed birthdays and graduations because he was always traveling for work. I resented him for being absent, for building this empire while I grew up essentially alone. And now," Sophia asked gently, "now I understand that every missed birthday was because he was protecting me. Every business trip was him staying far enough away that his enemies couldn't use me against him. Every dollar he put in my trust fund was insurance against the possibility that someday he might not be able to provide for me anymore." Anna's voice grew thick with emotion. "He sacrificed having a relationship with his daughter to keep her safe. That's not the kind of sacrifice a selfish man makes." Maria felt tears threatening and didn't try to stop them. She thought about all the mornings she had served Dmitri coffee, all the times she had seen him staring at hidden photographs, all the moments when she had sensed a deep sadness in him that she hadn't understood. Now she knew he had been looking at pictures of the daughter he couldn't acknowledge, mourning a relationship he couldn't have because love in his world was a liability that could get people killed. "Your father loves you very much," Maria said quietly, "even when he was Robert Sterling, even when he was pretending to be someone else. I could see it in his eyes whenever he talked about business trips to Portland. I never understood then, but I see it now." "Agent Mitchell arranged for us to meet," Anna said. "Next month in a secure location. It will be the first time we've seen each other face to face since the night federal agents came to my apartment and explained that everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie." "Are you nervous?" Sophia asked. "Terrified," Anna admitted with a laugh that held more tears than humor. "What do you say to someone who gave up everything to protect you? How do you even begin to have a normal conversation with your father when you've just learned that your father isn't who you thought he was?" Maria moved back to the table and reached across to squeeze Anna's hand. "You start with the truth. You tell him how you feel. You ask the questions you need answered, and you give both of yourselves time to figure out who you are to each other now. Is that what you did? When your life got turned upside down?" Maria thought about the question seriously. I'm still figuring it out. 6 months ago, I was a housekeeper who lived paycheck to paycheck and worried about making rent. Now I'm a woman who helped bring down international criminals, who has enough money in the bank to send Sophia to graduate school, who owns her own home in a place where people know her name and value her opinion. She squeezed Anna's hand tighter. I'm still learning who that person is. The three women sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each lost in contemplation of the strange paths that had brought them together. Outside, a school bus rumbled past, carrying children toward futures they couldn't yet imagine. Maria wondered if any of them would grow up to have lives as unpredictable as hers had become. There's one more thing, Anna said, reaching back into her satchel. My father wanted me to give you this. She handed Maria a small leather journal worn with age and use. Inside, the pages were filled with Dimitri's careful handwriting, some in English, some in Russian, some in what looked like a code she couldn't decipher. It's his diary from the early years in America, Anna explained, when he was first learning to be Robert Sterling, first building the company, first trying to figure out how to live as someone else. He writes about you quite a bit. Maria felt her breath catch. About me, about the housekeeper who noticed everything but never asked questions, about the woman who worked with such quiet dignity that she made him remember what it felt like to be proud of honest work, about how watching you with your daughter reminded him of what he was fighting to protect. Maria opened the journal to a random page. Seeing her name written in Dimitri's precise script, the entry was dated 3 years earlier. Maria Elena has been with us for 12 years now. Today I found her in the garden, teaching her daughter about the roses while she waited for me to finish a conference call. The girl, Sophia, was asking about photosynthesis, and Maria was explaining it with the patience of someone who understands that education is the most valuable gift a parent can give. Watching them together, I was reminded of my own father teaching me about computers in our small apartment in Moscow, how his eyes would light up when I grasped a particularly difficult concept. I have built an empire on stolen technology and hidden identities. But Maria Elena has built something more valuable, a daughter who will never have to steal or hide to achieve her dreams. Some days I think she is the wiser of us. Maria closed the journal, unable to continue reading. The idea that she had been observed not as an employee but as a person, that her relationship with Sophia had somehow provided comfort to a man living in exile from his own family, was almost too much to process. He sees you, Anna said softly. Maybe that's what made you different from other people in his life. You were invisible to everyone else, but he saw you, and when the time came, you saw him too. The morning sun had shifted, filling the kitchen with golden light that made everything seem softer, more hopeful. Sophia was making coffee for all three of them, moving around the small space with the easy confidence of someone who had found her place in the world. Anna was looking through the photos Maria had taped to the refrigerator, pictures of Sophia's graduation, of their new house, of the garden where tomatoes grew in neat rows. What happens now? Maria asked. For you, I mean, after you see your father. Anna considered the question carefully. I'm not sure. I have to decide whether to stay Anna Sterling or reclaim being Anya Volkova, whether to keep the life I built under a false identity or try to build a new one based on truth. Agent Mitchell says I can choose whatever name I want, whatever story feels most authentic. What does your heart tell you? That names don't matter as much as I thought they did, that I'm the same person regardless of what I'm called, but that maybe it's time to stop running from the past and figure out how to build a future that includes all of who I am. Sophia brought coffee to the table, and the three women sat together in the kind of comfortable silence that comes when people understand each other without needing to explain everything. Through the window, Maria could see their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, working in her flower garden with the focused attention of someone who understood that beautiful things required daily care. I have a confession, Maria said suddenly. Sometimes I miss it, not the danger or the fear, but the feeling of being part of something important, of knowing that what I did mattered in ways I never expected. You're still part of something important, Anna said firmly. You're raising a daughter who's going to help protect other people from the kind of criminals we dealt with. You're building a life that proves ordinary people can overcome extraordinary circumstances. You're showing other immigrants in your community that it's possible to start over and succeed. Sophia nodded in agreement. And you're the reason I understand that sometimes the right choice is also the dangerous choice. When I graduate and start working with the FBI, I'll carry that lesson with me. Maria felt a warmth spread through her chest, different from the adrenaline-fueled energy that had sustained her through those terrifying weeks in Los Angeles. This was quieter, deeper, the satisfaction of work well done, of choices made with integrity, of a life lived with purpose, even when that purpose wasn't clear at the time. "Will you stay in touch?" she asked Anna. "After you see your father, after you decide who you want to be. If you'd like me to, I think I'd like to have friends who understand what it means to rebuild your entire life from scratch." "We'd like that very much," Sophia said, speaking for both of them. As Anna prepared to leave, Maria walked her to the door. The morning light now bright and warm on the front porch. The neighborhood was coming alive. Children walking to school, adults heading to work. The ordinary rhythm of a community where the biggest drama was usually about whose turn it was to organize the block party. "Mrs. Santos," Anna said, pausing at the bottom of the porch steps, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found that letter? If you had just cleaned around it and pretended you never saw it?" Maria considered the question, thinking about all the ways her life could have continued along its predictable path. Sophia would have finished college, probably gotten a job with some tech company, maybe married and had children who would visit their grandmother in her small apartment in Eastley. Maria would have kept cleaning houses until her body gave out, saved what money she could and lived quietly on the margins of other people's lives. It would have been a good life. In its way, simple, safe, unexamined. "Sometimes I wonder," she said honestly. "But then I think about those 3,000 people who were freed when Kozlov's organization was destroyed. I think about your father finally being able to stop running. I think about Sophia learning that she's strong enough to handle whatever life throws at her." She smiled, feeling the truth of her words settle into her bones. "And I think maybe some letters are meant to be found." Anna nodded, her grey eyes bright with understanding. "Maybe some housekeepers are meant to find them." After Anna left, Maria stood on her porch for a few more minutes, looking out at the life she had built from the ruins of everything she thought she knew about herself. The house behind her was small but sturdy, filled with furniture she had chosen, and books she was learning to read in English and the smell of coffee. Sophia made exactly the way her grandmother had taught her. It wasn't the life she had planned, but it was the life she had earned. Every difficult choice, every moment of fear, every act of courage had led to this. A morning when she could stand on her own front porch, in her own neighborhood, watching her daughter prepare for a future that would be built on truth instead of necessity. When she went back inside, Sophia was already gathering her books for class. "That was nice," she said, not looking up from her laptop. "Meeting Anna, it makes it feel more complete somehow, like we finally know how the story ends." "Does it end?" Maria asked, genuinely curious about her daughter's perspective. Sophia paused in her packing, considering the question with the same analytical approach she brought to her programming assignments. "I think it ends one story and starts another one. The story about the housekeeper who found a letter and saved a bunch of people. That one's over. But the story about what we do with the rest of our lives, that one's just beginning." Maria smiled, feeling proud of her daughter's wisdom and grateful for the chance to witness her growth into the kind of person who could find meaning in chaos, hope in uncertainty, and strength in the simple act of choosing to keep moving forward. As Sophia left for class, Maria began her own morning routine. Not the careful, invisible choreography of cleaning someone else's house, but the satisfying work of maintaining her own space, her own life, her own small corner of a world that had turned out to be much larger and more complicated than she had ever imagined. The journal Dmitri had sent lay open on the kitchen table, its pages full of secrets she was only beginning to understand. But that was okay. She had learned that some truths took time to reveal themselves, that some stories were worth the patience required to read them carefully. Outside her window, the world continued its ancient dance of destruction and renewal, of endings that became beginnings, of ordinary people discovering that they were capable of extraordinary things when circumstances demanded it. And in her small house in Asheville, North Carolina, Maria Elena Santos began another day of the rest of her life, no longer invisible, no longer afraid, finally and completely herself.